What up, Cavs Nation? I'm your host, Ethan Sands, and I'm back with another episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. And joining me today, we know you missed him, Chris Fedor, cleveland.com, Cavs beat reporter, and we could not do this episode without him. Yes, you guessed it. It's a Hey Chris episode for the pod, and we're going to dive right in. Chris, we've talked about the importance of the seeding in the playoffs. We've talked about the challenges that the Cavs could face. We've talked about the threats that could be posed. So, when it comes to this question, we're getting into all the nuances of those things. This question comes from Lloyd Farmer from Mayfield Heights, Ohio. He says, why do you and Chris believe that the Celtics are such a bad matchup? True, the Cavs can't defend the three and the Celtics take tons, but the Celtics aren't as good defensively as in the past, especially at center. Don't let the recent stats fool you. Nikola Vucevic can score, but he can't defend. Neemias Queta can rebound, but he can't shoot. Jalen Tyson is as big and as strong as Jaylen Brown, and if he performs like he did versus Cade, it will be a draw at best. If he isn't playing well, the Celtics can't win a 7-game series. Not saying Jalen can shut him down, but he can make him work. Can't really expect Jason Tatum to be at his best this year. I think the rise of Jalen Tyson and the acquisition of James Harden changes everything. Well, that was long-winded, but Chris, I think it's a good question because I don't know if we would necessarily gone in depth to why this is the reasoning behind the Boston Celtics being the truest threat to the Cleveland Cavaliers reaching the NBA Finals. We've admitted the Detroit Pistons, especially after last night, that the Cavs have a plan going in that can decipher and try and dictate how matchups are found, especially against Cade Cunningham. The New York Knicks, while they might be the most formidable roster health-wise when it comes to Jason Tatum, still unsure whether or not he's going to come back this season, we know that the Cavs do not fear the New York Knicks as much as they might fear an individual player and have shown that they can match him in different capacities. So we're at Boston, and as the standings sit, the Cavs would have to face the Boston Celtics in the Eastern Conference Finals. So, Chris, I reiterate the question from our extra. What do you think is the reasoning behind the Boston Celtics being the hardest matchup for the Cleveland Cavaliers?
I think that's the important point, Ethan. I think it's just the most difficult matchup. Not to say that Boston will beat them 4 times in 7 tries. In fact, I don't think if the Cavs' main guys are fully healthy, I don't think any team in the Eastern Conference can beat the Cavs 4 times in 7 tries. I think this is a much better equipped team to deal with playoff level basketball than what they had 3 months ago. So if we were going into last year's playoffs, I would have said, oh my gosh, there are some vulnerabilities that the Cavs have that are going to prevent them from making the deep run into the postseason that they want. With this group, I don't see those same flaws being exposed to the same level by the competition in the Eastern Conference. Look, if they were in the Western Conference, it's a different conversation because Oklahoma City's out there, because Minnesota's out there, because Denver's out there. But we're talking about the Eastern Conference. And I think every single team in the East is flawed. And they have flaws that can be exposed in a 7-game series. But how do you mask those as best you can? What problems do you present for the other team? What answers do you make the other team try to solve with you? And I think the Cavs present the most problems of any team in the Eastern Conference. They present the most problems to Detroit. They present the most problems to New York. They present the most problems to Boston. But since we're flipping it and talking about who could threaten the Cavs, who could challenge the Cavs, to me it's Boston, because the bottom line is playoffs are about matchups. Playoffs are about what do you do well, what does the other team not do well. And if you're talking about it from a Cavs perspective, their weaknesses are all strengths of the Celtics. The Cavs can't defend the three-point line. Boston's one of the best three-point shooting teams in the NBA. The Cavs have had problems defending teams that can go 5 out. Boston, now that they have Vooch, can go 5 out. The Cavs have had a problem with teams that are elite rebounding teams. Boston is top 10 in defensive rebounding percentage. They're top 10 in rebounding percentage, and they're one of the best offensive rebounding teams in the NBA. So the problems that the Cavs have when it comes to rebounding, Boston can exploit. The other thing that I think Boston can do is, on defense, theoretically, they can switch everything. Now, that doesn't become as problematic with this version of the Cavs because James Harden is one of the best ISO players in the league, because Donovan Mitchell can go ISO with the best of them as well. But switchy defenses take the Cavs out of their usual flow offensively. They get stagnant. They start hunting matchups. The ball starts getting in the hands of other guys that aren't as advantageous from a Cavs perspective. So I think that's what it is. And just this doesn't even consider the fact that Jason Tatum could be coming back in some capacity for the Celtics. But just the ways that you can beat the Cavs, the Celtics are fully equipped to do that. You've got to be able to score. That's the other formula. If you're going to beat the Cavs in a 7-game series, or you're going to be competitive with them in a 7-game series, you can't win games 100-98. This offense is too good. This offense has too much firepower. So you might have to win a shootout. You know who has the best offense in the NBA? Boston. Statistically, it's the Celtics. As surprising as that may be, because they haven't played a single second with Jason Tatum, the Celtics have the best offense in the NBA coming into tonight. So they can score with them. They can exploit their issues in terms of guarding the three. They can exploit their issues in terms of rebounding. They can get them into iso ball and stagnant offense because of how much they switch. They can go 5 out and space the floor because of Vooch. And here's the other thing. I think just like last year in the Indiana series where Rick Carlisle could outcoach Kenny Atkinson, and he did, I think of all the coaches in the Eastern Conference, the one who has the best chance of the actual like teams that are going to matter. The one who has the best chance to outcoach Kenny Atkinson is Joe Mazzulla. I don't think Mike Brown can win a coaching chess match against Kenny Atkinson. I don't think J.B. Bickerstaff can win a coaching chess match against Kenny Atkinson. I don't think Jamal Mosley can. I don't think the guy in Toronto can. But Joe Mazzulla can win a coaching chess match against anybody. We have seen, if you're talking about competitive series and what's going to shift them and the smallest of margins, Joe Mazzulla might get a game or two in that series because of his coaching. So I do think of all the teams in the Eastern Conference, if there's a team that can test the Cavs and make it an uncomfortable series for them, I think Boston is best equipped to do that.
I'm in complete agreement. When we talk about the matchups and going into the specifics of the question that was asked by our subtexter, Jalen Tyson has not played real postseason minutes yet. And Chris, myself, Jimmy Watkins have all said that we believe that Jalen Tyson will be able to show up in the postseason. But we don't know that, right? Keon Ellis is also in this equation. Obviously, he's a little bit shorter. He's 6'4", but he is who the Cavs and Kenny Atkinson rely on defensively. And he's a guy that has not played any playoff basketball in his entire NBA career. So the moment is also a part of this conversation. Jaylen Brown has been there, won a championship. Jason Tatum, if he comes back, has won a championship, has been there. Peyton Pritchard, right? There are guys throughout this lineup that have that pedigree that is going to matter in a 7-game series when it comes to the reality of that matchup conversation. And the other thing that we've noticed with the Cavs is they're better players, better schemed when they are dictating the game itself. So if you're telling me that Jalen Tyson is going to be forced to play matchup with Jaylen Brown and Dean Wade, who is not healthy right now, and that'll get to our second question from our subtexters in a second, but he's not healthy right now, but is the best matchup for Jason Tatum in a 7-game series. That means that the Cavs are basically matching minutes with those guys because they do not have the reliability of having the size, because that's what our subtexture was talking about. Being the same size. Jaylen Brown, 6'6". Jalen Tyson, 6'6". A lot of J's here, right? But I think the understanding is that Jalen Tyson is proving against Jalen Brunson, against Kate Cunningham, against guys that are the same size as him, that he can match up with the physicality, the body-to-body matchups, and simply the mentality that it takes to be in those moments. But as Chris was alluding to, what happens if Sam Merrill gets caught in a switch? What happens if Keon Ellis gets caught in a switch? What happens if Jarrett Allen and Evan Mobley get caught in a switch? That changes the entire defensive process, and it feels like the Cavs will be forcing to get back to their original matchup, especially if they're in transition, which the Boston Celtics, can operate in the half court, still like to play with pace in transition as well.
I think there's one more thing too, Ethan, because I think this is important. Kenny Atkinson has shown, as we're coming down the stretch here in the regular season, he is trying to learn the viability of these small ball lineups. It is clear that there is experimentation going on here. And that's for the bigger picture. That's for the playoffs. And he understands if there is a weak point on this roster from a roster construction standpoint, not a stylistic one or not like an individual statistical based one, but from a roster construction standpoint. Because look, unless you're Oklahoma City or the dynastic Warriors of the last decade, there are going to be weak points on every single roster. It's just like, can the other team expose those well enough? So the Cavs' weak point is clear. It's the power forward spot when Evan Mobley's not occupying that spot. Is it Dean Wade? Is it Keon Ellis? Is it Jalen Tyson? Is it Max Strus in a small ball look? You know what I'm saying? So Kenny Atkinson is trying all these different variations and trying all these different guys to fill those backup power forward minutes. And it seems like his comfort, based on the roster construction of this team, his comfort is go small. Can I get away with Keon Ellis? Can I get away with Jalen Tyson? So the thing about Boston is the Cavs can get away with that against the Celtics a little bit better, I think. Now, Boston can try to go that way if Jason Tatum is healthy and right. And Boston sometimes does want to play that way. But I think the Cavs can get away with it because Sam Hauser, is he going to be the small ball four? Right? Is it going to be Baylor Shireman? You're talking about somebody who was outside the rotation looking in at the beginning of the season. Is it going to be Jordan Walsh? Is it going to be Hugo Gonzalez? Whoever it may be, if the Celtics decide, hey, we need to downsize to kind of match the Cavs may be able to downsize to the same level as Boston, or maybe even better than Boston. We saw the Cavs do it against the New York Knicks. They downsized with Jalen Tyson at the 4, and it was up to him to box out Cat or box out Mitchell Robinson or things OG Anunoby. You know what I mean? So if Kenny Atkinson's tendency, based on the current roster composition, is let's see if I can get away with playing small, I think the Cavs have a better chance to do that against a team like Boston. Like if you try and go small against maybe Toronto in round 1, you might get exposed. Not enough to lose the series, but certain pockets throughout the course of the game, Toronto's probably going to be able to exploit that a little bit better. Maybe New York over the course of a 7-game series is able to exploit that a little bit better. Maybe Detroit, possibly, depending on what lineups they put out there, can as well. But against the Celtics, I think the Cavs are capable of matching that, depending on what happens with Jason Tatum in that particular series. So, yes, I think Boston is a tough matchup for the Cavs. I think Boston is the toughest matchup for the Cavs in the Eastern Conference. But I don't think it's to the level that Boston wins that series. Going into that series, if the Cavs are full strength or close to it, I would pick the Cavs to win it. But you want to avoid them for as long as you possibly can if you're the Cavs.
I think the key word there is healthy. If the Cavs are fully healthy, they are able to challenge with the Boston Celtics, even if they have Jason Tatum. While this is a difficult conversation because we do not know the status of Jason Tatum, that could change by Friday when they play the Dallas Mavericks. That could change by the time that the Cavs play them on Sunday. But we're still waiting to see what decision Jason Tatum makes. But Chris, the Cleveland Cavaliers health track record is not pretty,
Right.
especially when we talk about the last 2 seasons in particular. So let's get into this next question from our subtexters. This comes from Stefan in Parma. He says, I keep hearing talk about what the Cavs will be able to do when they are fully healthy. But it seems like every time they start to get healthy, someone else gets hurt. How realistic do you think it is to expect the Cavs to be healthy enough for a deep playoff run this year? And Chris, I think, again, health is the number one factor, right? In all playoff series, in all of the playoff runs that we have seen, we talk about teams that might have had an easier pathway to the NBA Finals or the Eastern Conference Finals, even because the opponents that they were facing were not healthy. Western Conference opponents can be in this conversation as well. But, Chris, over the last 2 years in specific, Dean Wade, DeAndre Hunter, Darius Garland, Donovan Mitchell, the Cavs have not been able to get healthy, and they haven't gotten out of the Eastern Conference semifinals. The most games that they have potentially had to play is 14, and they still have not been capable of maintaining health in the postseason. Whether that's lingering injuries from the regular season, whether that's things that happen during the games of the playoffs with the physicality ramped up. I think it would be hard for me to believe that the Cleveland Cavaliers are going to be capable of maintaining this image of health, especially with soft tissue injuries that the Cavs are dealing with at this portion in the season with under 20 games left. When we're talking about Donovan Mitchell having 2 years of calf injuries into the Eastern Conference semifinals, we're talking about Dean Wade, knee, ankle injuries for the last few years, right? And especially when it comes to Dean Wade, and especially when we're talking about an Eastern Conference Finals potential matchup against the Boston Celtics, that is the changing dynamic of whether or not they have that spacing, whether or not they have that size on the floor. And obviously, you mentioned the 4 guard lineups that Kenny Atkinson could deploy. Most of them are going to have some iteration of Dean Wade involved. So my thought process, my belief that the Cleveland Cavaliers are going to be healthy enough to maintain this level of health or the ideal level of health through not just 2 series, 3 series, and then getting to the NBA Finals is lackluster.
Look, I think it's a question that a lot of people have when it comes to these Cavs, and I think they have a lot that they need to answer when it comes to that. James Harden is still dealing with a fractured thumb. Keon Ellis is dealing with a fractured finger. Donovan Mitchell, another groin injury. Soft tissue injuries linger. Soft tissue injuries are preventative. Soft tissue injuries are difficult for guys to play through because one bad step or something like that, and then all of a sudden it pops back up again. So these are all things that the Cavs have to answer. There's no doubt about it. But the thing that I will say, Ethan, or the thing that I believe is that this team's depth is to a different level than what it's been in the past. So it would be terrible for the Cavs from their perspective to have to play with a limited Donovan Mitchell. Or if Evan Mobley were to miss time, or if Dean Wade missed a couple of playoff games here or there. But I think this team's roster is better equipped to deal with that. It's interesting because there have been so many questions about the Cavs in playoff pasts. And so many people accused me and you at times of being too critical of them or not believing in them enough and saying, hey, look what they did in the regular season. How are you possibly going to say that Indiana is going to challenge them in a 7-game series? hey, look what they did in the regular season. What do you mean they're going to lose in the conference semifinals? They can hang with Boston and blah, blah, blah. There's a reason why we had our doubts about the Cavs, and they showed themselves. But I don't have as many doubts about this particular roster. That's my point. I believe more in this roster than I did last year's roster. Forget the 64 wins in the regular season. Forget the historic offense. I was the one that was saying the Indiana series was a coin flip, essentially. People were like, Indiana? What are you talking about, Indiana? You're just trying to convince yourself that they have a chance against the Cavs. No, I think it's a coin flip series. So, like, there were warts within that 64 run, right? There were warts within that historically great offense. And it went beyond just the Cavs were injured in the series against Indiana. But like I said, I believe more in this roster. I think there's more playable depth here. I think there are more options for Kenny Atkinson. I think there are more lineup variations. I think there's more diversity within the offense and diversity within the defensive schemes, or there can be based on the personnel that they have. And I think it's been important during this recent stretch to be without Donovan Mitchell. If this was the beginning of the season, if this was pre-trade deadline, the Cavs probably would have lost every single one of these games without Donovan. They probably would have. They could not function to the same level without Donovan Mitchell. He had one of the best on-off point differentials for a reason, because when he was on the floor, he was great. When he was off the floor, the Cavs were excuse me, I don't want to go that far. They were so bad. They looked unrecognizable. They did. So you have seen that even without Donovan Mitchell, they can create a little bit of offense. They can do it to a good enough level to compete and maybe potentially win some of these games. Because James Harden's better than Darius Garland at everything except for being fast and being young. Because this version of Jarrett Allen is very, very different. He's been empowered more. He's more comfortable within the offense. He's further removed from the finger issues that he was dealing with at the beginning of the year. He's just a better basketball player overall. He has somebody that he believes will keep him involved in the offense, and James Harden, even Dennis Schröder, who has so many games of playoff experience, so many games of being a point guard, starter, or backup, and understands the value of a big like Jarrett Allen. So at times, if the Cavs were going to be without Evan Mobley, you're like, oh my God, what are they going to do? Like, how are they going to make up for that? Well, Jarrett Allen turned into Wilt Chamberlain, and they made up for it. And then Donovan Mitchell hurts his groin, and you're like, oh my God, what are they going to do? How are they going to score more than 85 points? Well, they keep finding ways. You know what I'm saying? Because Dennis Schröder has played at a higher level and plays with more maturity and plays with a little bit more professionalism and readiness than some of these other guys. Because Darius Garland was a statistical negative at the beginning of the year. Because DeAndre Hunter was a statistical negative at the beginning of the year. Because Lonzo Ball was a statistical negative at the beginning of the year. You don't have those same things anymore, right? So a lot of the weak points of this roster have been replaced with guys who have been pluses. So I think there's more playable depth. I think the Cavs are better equipped to deal with these injuries. Would Donovan Mitchell being out in any playoff game hurt the Cavs? Of course. But would you look at it the same way and say they have absolutely no chance of winning one game against the Knicks or one game against the Celtics? No, I don't think you would look at it the same kind of way, because I think this team is better, because I think this team is deeper, and because I think this team is more ready for playoff level basketball than what it was a couple of months ago.
Chris, I love the receipts, man. I love when you're pulling out the receipts from last year. Obviously, we had some hard times on this podcast, not just last year, obviously, but this season as well. The Cavs didn't start how they wanted to. I had people within the organization reaching out to me like, hey, are you being a little too critical? Why do you think the margin for error is so thin? We're in December. Well, because what we were seeing, but there was also what other people were saying, indicating that this team had things to prove, right? And we knew that coming into the season, but it also was simply the understanding of there was so much that the Cavs could still do in December. When it was before the trade deadline, when it was them still trying to get healthy, still trying to understand the complexities of Darius Garland's injury. Max Strus still hadn't played a game, still hasn't played a game yet, right? And while the Cavs made maneuvers, it's not necessarily to me about the maneuvers that they made, but the people that they gained, right? We're talking about how the difference in mindset, the difference in accountability, right? Those were the different things that we were seeing before this trade deadline. We weren't talking about the process. We understood that there was going to be a process. It was, okay, well, the Cows aren't playing hard for 48 minutes. How do we get them to do that? Is that a player thing? Is that an accountability thing? Does Donovan Mitchell need help in the leadership category? You know what the Cows did and what they were able to do. And I talked about this on yesterday's podcast. Kenny Atkinson kind of alluding to James Harden having that level of mentality to not force things in fourth quarter scenarios, being more mature, more mentally stable, more trusting in the roster around him. So it gets into the last question of today's podcast from Chris in Lakewood. He says, "Hey, gents, my completely subjective opinion is that this is starting to look like the most tenacious version of the Cavs that I can remember from the past few years. Am I hallucinating, or are they actually showing more grit now than they did not only earlier this year, but perhaps in the last couple of seasons?" Chris, I know you answered this a little bit, so I'm going to go in because I truly believe that the Cavs gaining Dennis Schröder, who has been in the league for 13 years, James Harden, who's been in the league for 17 years, and Keon Ellis, who is hungry to prove that he is a winner. You got three different guys that have a winning mentality. Jalen Tyson talked about it after last night's game against the Pistons. The understanding the gravity of James Harden and who he was as a player, top 75 player all time in the NBA. But the amount and the vigor of how he wanted to win ball games was surprising to a second-year player in the league who has grown up watching James Harden do what he does. Chris, when we're talking about these guys, the value that they've brought, it's not necessarily the actions that Kenny Atkinson is able to run. It's not necessarily the combinations that the Cavs are able to put together. Sure, that is huge. But the biggest overarching view of this Cleveland Cavaliers team coming into the season was they weren't mentally tough enough. And through the first part of the season, they had not proven that they had changed that. I had written an article halfway into the year critiquing the midseason grades of Kenny Atkinson and all the things we knew coming into the season that hadn't been addressed. Now we're seeing different ways that the Cavs are breaking out of a full court press. Now we're seeing the two big lineups being utilized in a different way. Now we're seeing Evan Mobley get realized back to his former form. We're now seeing how all of these players are starting to find their role, find their niche, and find their place within this roster. And that's also a portion to say not only the mentality, but the energy and the value that they play with. It's not just Naquan Tomlin and Craig Porter Jr. anymore, Chris. Obviously, they add a different level of that. But in the first unit, Donovan Mitchell, James Harden, Evan Mobley, Dean Wade, Jared Allen, they all play with that because that's the standard that has now been set. It doesn't kind of get diminished when Keon Ellis or Dennis Schröder enter the game. It gets amplified. And we're starting to see that everybody is buying in and having a different belief level that they can actually do something special this season. And that tenacious level, to Chris's point from Lakewood, that is shown not only on the defensive end, but on the offensive end, with Evan Mobley being more attack-minded, Jared Allen being more attack-minded, and the guys around them feeding them in that way as well. the confidence, it feels like, is sky high.
We don't have to go all the way back to the trade deadline, but it was clear, Ethan, that there were traits that the Cavs were valuing. There were traits that the Cavs were looking for. They were saying, we don't have certain things on this roster. We don't have the answers internally. We need to add those things externally. And they added those things. Dennis Schröder, in the nicest way possible, is an a-hole. He plays with an edginess. He plays with a tenacity. Keon Ellis is nonstop effort every time he takes the floor. And sometimes it's going to go bad and it's going to lead to 6 fouls in however many minutes. But he's going to give extra efforts. He's going to make things difficult in terms of teams completing passes along the perimeter because he's so handsy, because he gets into the passing lanes. And like all these different things have been added to this roster. So that's part of it. The other thing is you have 2 steady, reliable, mature point guards. 2 steady, reliable, mature, professional guys that can organize the offense, run the offense, legitimate point guards, and that doesn't even include Donovan Mitchell, Dennis Schröder, and James Harden. The thing about those 2 guys is you cannot rattle, and it doesn't mean they're perfect, and it doesn't mean that they don't make mistakes, and it doesn't mean that they don't have bad games. They're going to have bad games. They're human, but you can't rattle them. You can't show them something that they haven't seen or that's going to cause them to panic or cause the offense to completely lose its flow and get out of rhythm because they've seen everything, because they've been in the game so long, because they've been in so many playoff games, because they've been on big stages. Dennis Schröder, World Cup. Dennis Schröder, Olympics. Dennis Schröder, all these other things in Germany. The pressure, the competition, the stakes of those games. You can't overlook those things. And again, he's not going to be perfect. He's going to make mistakes. But you can't fluster him and fluster this team the same kind of way because of the personnel changes. And I think that's really, really important. This idea that James Harden, these teams are going to try and blitz him. He doesn't care. He's like, all right, I've seen that before. I know how to combat that. I know where my outlets are. I'm not going to retreat all the way to center court or all the way to the sideline because a second defender is coming at me. I'm going to use my physicality. I'm going to use my brain. I'm going to stay composed. I'm going to be poised. And I'm just going to allow us to play 4-on-3. And that's something that you see. That steadiness, that reliability, that maturity, that patience. That's all there with James Harden. And the Cavs feel that. And I think the Cavs feel like every time they get the ball in his hands, they're going to find a way to get a quality offensive look. And I think that's different than what it's been in years past. I think there was a book on how to rattle Darius Garland, how to rattle Lonzo Ball, how to make Evan Mobley really, really uncomfortable by being physical with him and pushing him off his spot and all that kind of stuff. But you can't do that with James Harden. You can't. You can't do that with Donovan Mitchell. You can't do that to the same level with Dennis Schröder. So I think that's really, really important. And that's a different kind of toughness, right? Kenny Atkinson has said over the last 2 weeks, sometimes you have to read between the lines with Kenny, but he's talked about offensive physicality and fighting for your spot. How hard are you cutting? How much are you fighting for positioning? How much are you fighting off 2 defenders that are coming at you versus retreating or picking up your dribble or whatever the case may be? So that's where physicality shows. That's where toughness sometimes shows. And I just think this group is better equipped to deal with some of that kind of pressure from opponents, some of that kind of physicality from opponents, some of that kind of tenacity from opponents. And yeah, like it's now become more of a team thing, but it's the individual traits that James Harden has brought, that Dennis Schröder has brought, that Keon Ellis has brought, that some of the guys who are no longer on this roster, some of the guys subtracted from this roster, those traits were lacking from them. I thought it was really, really funny. Darius's opening press conference when he first got to Los Angeles, it was the night that the Clippers played against the Cavs. And it happened at halftime. And one of the things that he was talking about was he was like, yeah, I have this reputation for being goofy and kind of nonchalant. And I was just thinking to myself, there's a reason why that reputation exists. That didn't just come out of anywhere. Nobody's just making stuff up and throwing it against the wall. You know what I'm saying? Like, there is evidence of that kind of style, him having that style, and that being problematic at times for this team when you get to the playoffs. You know what I'm saying? So, like, sometimes these reputations, there's a reason why they're attached to guys. You know what I'm saying? Sometimes these criticisms, there's a reason why people use certain terms as criticism. It's because that's what you're showing to be. So I do think Dennis Schröder and James Harden and Keon Ellis, there's just a different tenacity that they bring to this team. There's a different maturity that they bring to this team. And you're feeling that. And I think it's going to be hard. Remember, in 2023, Mitchell Robinson used a term that said, the Cavs bigs were shook. He did this. He said they were shook. And they were. There's no getting around that. That's how they looked. That's how they played. I don't think there's going to be anybody that's going to be able to make those kinds of comments about this particular group. Because I don't think this group is going to get shook. I don't think this group is going to get rattled. And it doesn't mean that they're going to win the championship. And it doesn't mean that they're going to sweep every single playoff series. And it doesn't mean that they're going to be perfect. But the area that opposing teams felt like they could prey on over and over and over again, that opposing teams felt like they could test over and over and over again, I don't think they can do that with this group.
And Chris, I want to shout out Jimmy Watkins. I know he's not on today's podcast, but remember last year he was like, I'm skeptical about this whole Kumbaya Kenny. I'm skeptical about the beautiful flowing offense that the Cavs have been running. Obviously, it led to the second best regular season offense in NBA history, but the Cavs did not know how to operate when plays broke down. The Cavs did not know how to win ugly. They had to solely rely on their star players to step up. And to your point, I think the players around them, obviously, as you mentioned at the trade deadline, James Harden, Dennis Schröder, Keon Ellis, they have this level of competitiveness that not only taps into themselves, but it also allows the players around them to tap into what they had all along. Donovan Mitchell, playoff riser, loved from the very moment that Keon and Dennis entered into the practice facility, he was having fun with them. He was enjoying their presence. He was joking in their press conference, right? Like they had been there for years because he knew that they had the switch that they could flip. I hate that saying, but it might be not truer for any other Cavs team than this team. And I'm not talking about turning on the physicality. I'm not talking about turning on the emotional gravity that is necessary. I'm talking about turning it on from knowing that you can have fun in the locker room, you can play your music, you can kiki, you can talk,
Crack jokes.
after the game is over, during practice, all these things. But when the game flips, you have a certain mindset. It is in front of you. It is whoever you are competing against, they're going to get it. I'm saying that because Donovan Mitchell has played like that his entire career. And not to disrespect anybody that he's played with, but not everybody who he's had to rely on in his career has played to that level.
I also think there's a level of urgency. That's something that you feel. There's a level of urgency. James Harden's 36 years old. He has no idea how much longer his career is going to go. He doesn't know how many more chances he's going to get at that elusive championship. So he has the same viewpoint of just how fleeting things are in the NBA and how when you're in a situation that is potentially special, you better capitalize on it because you may not get another shot. And I think young players sometimes don't understand the gravity of that because they're looking at it saying, that's fine, we'll be back next year. Or that's fine. We still have this, and this, and these guys are going to be back, and we'll get them next year or the year after. We have this runway. Remember the runway conversation? President of Basketball Operations, Kobe Altman, used it over and over and over again. It seemed to bother Donovan Mitchell that he used it as well in response to the whole James Harden thing. And I think it's the same with Dennis Schröder. I mean, this dude has bounced around the NBA. He's an essential nomad, and he knows that when you're in this kind of situation, you better capitalize on it. And if not, you're probably not getting that shot next year, or you're probably not getting that shot 2 years from now. So the sense of urgency that is felt throughout this organization matches the same one it feels like that Donovan Mitchell had coming into this season.
And it also pulls out that level of competitive spirit from guys who might not necessarily have played with it because they had that free flowing. They had that kumbaya kind of, they had that mindset and personality to kind of lean back on. Evan Mobley said against the Pistons both times that we're here. We're this team. We're capable. We're going for it. Jared Allen, not just in the month of February before James Harden got here, was asked and tasked with stepping his game up. He's been playing to a different level. The urgency has grown. And I think there is an understanding in the locker room of this team has everything that is necessary to compete, whether that's good, whether that's pretty, whether it's bad, whether it's ugly. They have everything in the locker room. And I want to go back to Max Strus, who hasn't played a singular minute in the NBA this season, against the Boston Celtics 2 years ago. In his closing press conference, he said, we had enough in this locker room, talent-wise, to get it done. I think, and we haven't gotten this chance yet, but I think if we were to talk to Max Strus, it would not just be the talent that he will be referring to that the Cavs have at the level capable, necessary to compete for a championship. And you know why Max is the perfect person to talk about outside of Sam Merrill? Because he's been there. And he's been to a NBA Finals. He came up short, but he knows what it takes to get there.
I also think there's something to this, Ethan, that everybody saw how valued the core four was and how celebrated the core four was. And I think everybody inside the organization knew the importance of the core four and the just if the Cavs were going to get ultimately where they wanted to go, the feeling was that the core four was going to be intact and the core four was going to lead them there. But when you have a key member of what was your foundation, when you have a key member, a key pillar of this franchise that was sent away at the trade deadline, I think that was, oh shit, like, whoa, what a change of direction for this organization. I could be next. If you're anybody not named Donovan Mitchell, you looked at that trade at the deadline and you were probably saying, oh, whoa, I guess we're not as safe as we thought whoa. You know what I mean? And I think, it's not a coincidence to me that Jared Allen started taking off shortly thereafter. That'll light something underneath you. When one of the mainstays of this roster, the longest tenured member of this organization, aside from Dean Wade, is sent away at the trade deadline because this front office says we're not good enough. We needed something else outside this organization for us to get ultimately where we want to go. Yeah, there was a sense of, okay, this is the organization buying into us, giving us a better chance at winning that championship. But that was also the organization saying, if you're not getting it done, if you're not playing to a high enough level, it doesn't matter if you're seen as a core four, a member of that group. It doesn't matter if you make $40 to $50 million. It doesn't matter how long you've been with this organization. This is big business. We're chasing a championship here. We're going to set our feelings and our emotions aside. So if you're somebody other than Donovan Mitchell, you see Darius Garland get moved and you're like, I better pick up my game. Like, if he can go at the trade deadline, and if we don't reach our goals this year, maybe I'm gone this offseason. Maybe they explore that possibility. So I do think, in a way, aside from, the belief and the confidence and all that different stuff that comes with bringing in a future Hall of Famer and Dennis Schröder and Keon Ellis and feeling like your roster is better and more complete, I do think that there was a fire lit under some of these other guys that maybe were, quote unquote, underachieving or not playing to their previous level of saying, I got to pick it up.
It's telling how Kobe Altman had to admit to himself multiple different things at the trade deadline. Yeah. Not only admitting failure with the DeAndre Hunter trade, and we can talk about whether or not that is going to rear its ugly head against Boston all we want, but getting rid of the 3 lowest net rated players of the team indicated that, right? The other portion of that is Kobe Altman, president of basketball operations, his continued response over the last few off seasons was, it's only the year blank of the core 4. That could no longer be, in the nicest way, an excuse. It was no longer something that could be a crutch.
Yeah, I mean, it was his safety net, for sure. It was always his safety net.
Exactly. And every time we would come after this press conference during the offseason, and me, Chris, and Jimmy would all look at each other and like, how many times is he going to be able to say this? And we knew that this season could be different. Didn't necessarily know that it was going to happen mid-season, but we obviously understood that Darius Garland, Jarrett Allen could be on the chopping block if the Cavs did not reach their goals. The Cavs, the organization, the front office, Kobe Altman expedited that a little bit. The expectations got a little bit higher. The trust, the belief got a little bit higher in understanding where this Cavs team is, what the potential was with the players around them, and the reality of the Donovan Mitchell contract that is continuously looming with one guaranteed contract left in Cleveland, and having to make a decision, having to make a run to find a way to convince him that this is the city, this is the team where he can win a championship. But we're still learning about this Cavs team. We're still going to find out more over this 4-game stretch. We're going to find a lot out based on whether Jason Tatum comes back or not on Sunday against the Cavs, where they face the Celtics.
Either way, Sunday's going to be fun.
Exactly. I completely agree. And I think everybody should look forward to it. I think the Cavs have it circled on their calendar. I think Kenny Atkinson always has Boston circled on his calendar. But whether or not the Cavs are going to be healthier after this 4-game stretch, I think that is the 4-day stretch. I think that is going to be the biggest indicator of where the Cavs are, how they're going to be cautious with their players for the final 19 games of the season. But with all that being said, that'll wrap up today's episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. But remember to become a Cavs insider and interact with Chris, me, and Jimmy by subscribing to Subtext. You want to have your questions answered on the pod? You want to get a shout out on the podcast? This is the way to do so. The only way you can do that is signing up for a 14-day free trial or visiting cleveland.com/Cavs and clicking on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word STOP. It's easy, but we can tell you that the people who sign up stick around, because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from me, Chris, and Jimmy. This isn't just our podcast, it's your podcast. And the only way to have your voice heard is through Subtext. Y'all be safe. We out.